Before moving on to the story, don't forget to subscribe and like. Have a nice listening time. It was one of those long, empty stretches of highway where you feel completely isolated. No lights, no buildings, just endless darkness on both sides of the road. I had been driving for hours, trying to reach my parents' house for the holidays. The road seemed to stretch forever, and my eyes were starting to get heavy. I hadn't seen a single car for miles, and the quiet of the night began to creep under my skin. Eventually, I noticed a rest stop coming up on the right. Relieved, I decided to pull over and take a break, maybe grab some snacks or coffee to keep me going. The rest stop was eerie, though. It had only one other car parked in the corner, and the fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting long, unsettling shadows. There was something off about the place. The atmosphere felt thick, as if I wasn't alone, even though I saw no one. I stepped inside the tiny convenience store, greeted by the buzz of an old vending machine and the hum of a broken TV hanging in the corner. The clerk behind the counter didn't say a word, just stared at me with vacant eyes. I brushed off the strange vibe and headed to the back of the store to grab a bottle of water. That's when I saw him. A man, tall and pale, standing near the bathroom door. His clothes were drenched, like he had just been caught in a rainstorm, but it hadn't rained in days. His eyes met mine for a moment, and I felt an intense chill run down my spine. Something about him was deeply unsettling. He didn't look right. His skin seemed too tight on his face, like it was stretched over his skull. I quickly looked away, pretending I hadn't noticed him, and hurried back to the counter to pay. As I handed the clerk my money, I couldn't help but glance back toward the bathroom. The man was gone. I shook off the unease and returned to my car. But as soon as I got inside, I noticed something even more disturbing. The stranger was now standing by the only other car in the lot, just staring at me. His face was blank, but his eyes were locked on mine, unblinking. A sudden wave of panic surged through me. I didn't want to be alone out here with this guy. I started my engine, ready to get back on the road as fast as possible. That's when I noticed something even more chilling. The car he was standing next to, it wasn't just parked. The doors were wide open, and inside, I could see a mess of bags, clothes, and blood. A dark, smeared stain on the driver's seat. My heart sank, and I could feel the adrenaline kicking in. I wasn't just imagining this. Something terrible had happened, and that man, he was part of it. I slammed the car into reverse, trying to stay calm as I backed out of the parking space. But as I did, the man started walking toward me, slowly at first, then faster. His expression didn't change, still blank, still staring, but his pace quickened unnaturally. Within seconds, he broke into a full sprint. I floored the gas pedal, my tires screeching as I shot out onto the highway. My heart was pounding in my chest, hands shaking on the wheel. In the rearview mirror, I could see him standing at the edge of the rest stop, just watching me drive away, his figure getting smaller and smaller in the distance. I thought I was safe, but I couldn't shake the fear that something was terribly wrong. My mind raced. Who was that guy? What had he done? And most importantly, why was he there, alone in the middle of nowhere? I drove for miles, trying to push the image of his pale face out of my mind. The highway remained empty, not a single car in sight. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. Every few minutes, I glanced in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see him again. Then I did. I nearly swerved off the road when I saw it. His face, just barely visible in the reflection of my rear window. He was sitting in the back seat. I froze, my mind going blank with terror. How could he have gotten in? I hadn't stopped since the rest stop. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I stared into the mirror, not wanting to believe what I was seeing. But there he was, silent, unmoving, his eyes fixated on me like a predator sizing up its prey. I slammed the brakes. The car screeched to a halt, the tires skidding across the asphalt. I whipped around to confront him, my breath heavy and ragged. But when I turned, the back seat was empty. Nothing. No one. I was alone again, or at least, that's what I tried to convince myself. The air inside the car felt colder, like the temperature had dropped by 10 degrees. My hands were trembling, my pulse racing in my ears. I had to be losing my mind. Maybe it was exhaustion from the drive. Maybe it was just my nerves. But something deep inside me knew it wasn't over. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and started driving again, slower this time. But after a few minutes, I saw something up ahead. My heart dropped when I realized what it was. It was the same rest stop, the same flickering lights, the same empty parking lot, except this time, there were no cars. It was as if I had never left. Somehow, no matter how far I drove, I had ended up right back where I started. My stomach twisted in knots as I pulled into the lot, my headlights casting long, eerie shadows across the pavement. I didn't want to stop, but something told me I had no choice. The highway seemed endless, and I had no idea how I had looped back to the same place. I turned off the engine, sitting in the silent, dark car for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. My phone had no signal, and the isolation of the night pressed down on me like a weight. The rest stop, now completely deserted, looked even more sinister than before. I knew I couldn't stay here, but something was drawing me in. I stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin. The rest stop felt even more abandoned than before, a heavy, oppressive quiet hanging in the air. As I approached the door to the convenience store, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't turn back. I pushed the door open. Inside, the store was exactly as I had left it. The flickering fluorescent lights, the hum of the broken TV, even the empty counter where the clerk had stood earlier. But now, there was no clerk. No sign of life at all. I turned to leave when a faint sound stopped me in my tracks, a wet, shuffling noise coming from the back of the store. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned to face the bathroom door. It was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I could see a shadow moving inside. I knew I shouldn't go back there. Every rational part of my mind told me to run, to get in my car and drive away, but something compelled me forward. I crept toward the door, my breath shallow and uneven. The shuffling stopped as I reached the door. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the door swung open. Standing in the doorway was the man, the same pale, drenched figure from earlier, but now his face was twisted into a grotesque grin. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, staring straight into mine as he whispered in a voice that sent chills down my spine. "You can't leave. Not now." Before I could react, he lunged at me, his cold, bony hands grabbing my wrist with unnatural strength. I screamed and pulled back, but his grip tightened. Panic surged through me as I struggled to break free, my vision blurring with fear. In a final burst of adrenaline, I wrenched my arm away and bolted for the exit. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My only focus was getting to my car, escaping this nightmare before it was too late. I jumped into the driver's seat, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the keys. The engine roared to life, and I sped out of the lot, not daring to glance in the rearview mirror. I didn't care if I ended up on the same road again. I just needed to get as far away from that place as possible. As I raced down the highway, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see him again, lurking in the back seat or standing in the distance. But the road ahead remained empty, the darkness stretching on endlessly. I never found out who, or what, that man was. But one thing is certain, I'll never stop at another rest stop alone in the middle of the night again. And if you ever find yourself driving down an empty highway late at night, with no one around for miles, be careful where you pull over, because sometimes you're not as alone as you think.